When Jimmy Kimmel thought he'd humiliate Karoline Leavitt with an old college clip, she didn't just survive, she made America rise. This wasn't an interview. It was a slap across the face of mockery culture. And what brought millions to tears was her silence. If you believe America still needs voices that speak truth without needing a mic hit, like comment, I stand with Karoline and share this video with someone who needs to remember that dignity still matters. Don't forget to subscribe, because today's silence might just be tomorrow's fire.
The house lights dimmed. The opening music hit its final note. Jimmy Kimmel walked out under the studio's cold blue overheads, his usual smirk sharper tonight. The camera zoomed in just as he clasped his hands and leaned toward the crowd. "Tonight's different," he said, eyes glittering. "We've got someone from the White House. Let's see if she brought the truth with her." Laughter burst from the crowd like steam from a shaken kettle. A few cheers followed, but the room's tone was clear, cynical, ready for a takedown. Kimmel didn't need to name her yet. Everyone already knew. The youngest White House press secretary in American history was backstage seconds away from stepping into the lion's den. The camera cut to the guest chair empty, glowing under a cold spotlight. Then a deliberate pause, a deep breath in the crowd, and then she appeared. Karoline Leavitt stepped out. No flash, no wave, no fake grin. Just a steady stride in a navy blue suit, her blonde hair falling neatly over her shoulders. Her expression focused, her eyes hard as flint. This wasn't a woman there to charm the room, she came to face it. The audience split instantly like oil and water. From one side, respectful applause, hesitant but firm, mostly older seated near the front. From the other, loud whistles, mocking claps, and a few shouted remarks that the audio team had to suppress in real time. The tension palpable. The kind you could cut with a knife and still hit resistance. Karoline didn't flinch. She walked center stage without a twitch, her heels clacking lightly against the floor. She nodded once to Kimmel, calmly, coolly. Not friendly, not hostile, just clear, "I'm not here for your game." Kimmel raised his brows. He extended his hand with that familiar late-night charm, more showman than statesman. "Karoline Leavitt, everyone," he said, drawing out the vowels. The crowd responded, but unevenly. Applause on one side, scoffing laughter on the other. It wasn't unity, it was theater, and it was primed to explode. They shook hands briefly, firm grip, no lingering. Karoline took her seat, crossing one leg over the other, eyes fixed forward, like she'd just been called into combat briefing, not late-night banter. Kimmel slid behind his desk, rapped the wood once, and smirked toward the cameras. Let's get into it. But it wasn't getting into it, not yet. It was posture. It was a dance. The audience didn't know they weren't watching an interview. They were watching an ambush. And Karoline, she knew. Kimmel leaned in just enough to signal control. "So, Karoline," he said smoothly, "you work at the White House. Do you have a map to help you find your way through the president's tweets?" A cheap shot. Instant laugh line. The room shook with amusement, but not all of it was comfortable. Karoline let the noise pass. She didn't take the bait. Not yet. She simply nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting half an inch. Then she adjusted her posture, sat up straighter, and let the audience settle. There was no fluster, no laugh, track-worthy comeback, just silence. And it was powerful. The camera caught Kimmel shifting in his chair, just slightly. He had thrown the first punch, but he wasn't expecting the silence to hit back harder. She didn't answer his question. Not yet. Instead, she looked at him, measured calm. Then she spoke. "I believe in facts, Jimmy, not formats." The crowd paused, unsure how to respond. She continued, "I'm not here to trade jokes. I'm here to speak for people who don't have access to this stage, people who can't afford to laugh at politics anymore." No applause this time. Just quiet. Dense, awkward, electric quiet. The kind that says she didn't come here to play. Came here to change the tone. Kimmel blinked. He shifted again, leaned back, bought himself a second. Then he let out a soft chuckle. "Okay," he said. "Tough room tonight. But the audience wasn't laughing. They were watching. Karoline didn't gloat. She didn't jab back. She just waited. Her silence was louder than his last joke, and she knew it. This was not the interview Kimmel planned, and it was only the first minute. Somewhere backstage, a producer whispered, "We've got a problem." She's not reacting. No, she wasn't reacting. She was controlling. Jimmy Kimmel smiled like a man setting a snare. He leaned into the moment with calculated charm, his voice coated in velvet sarcasm. "Karoline," he began, "what's it like being the spokesperson for someone who tweets more than he breathes?" The crowd erupted. Laughter filled the studio like a chorus of late-night certainty. Some cheered, others leaned back, smugly satisfied that the first jab had landed. Kimmel smirked, soaking in the moment, confident that his line would rattle her. It always did. Most political guests laughed nervously, deflected, or stumbled. That was the formula. That was the game. But not tonight. Karoline Leavitt didn't blink. She didn't adjust in her seat. She didn't even twitch at the mention of presidential tweets. Instead, she waited. She let the laughter roll through the room, let the energy peak. Then, with the same composure she'd carried onto the stage, she answered, calm, clear, and devastating. "I don't speak for Twitter, Jimmy," she said, her voice low but unmistakably firm. "I speak for America." The room froze. For a split second, the audience didn't know how to respond. And that second stretched longer than Jimmy expected. It was as if someone had flipped the air conditioner to Arctic. Then, like a lightning bolt, came the applause. But not from the whole room, from one side. The clapping was deliberate, proud, and rising from the older seats, folks who didn't come to laugh but to listen. Folks who remembered a time when public service was about responsibility, not performance. The kind of Americans who didn't tweet but knew what it meant to sacrifice to work and to believe. Jimmy's grin faltered. He didn't expect that. Not the silence, not the shift. He raised an eyebrow, trying to recover with a chuckle. "Well, that's a serious answer," he muttered, tapping his pen against the desk. Karoline didn't smile, and that unsettled him even more. Because while Kimmel was playing for punchlines, Karoline was speaking to purpose. She wasn't there to trade quips. She came armed with resolve, not rehearsed jokes, and the crowd was starting to feel it. Even those who didn't agree with her politically now understood this woman wasn't going to be thrown off script, because she wasn't reading from one. Jimmy pressed forward, his tone shifting slightly. A bit more edge, a bit less play. "But seriously," he said, feigning curiosity, "how do you keep a straight face when you have to defend some of the things your boss says?" Karoline turned her head slightly. Her posture didn't change. Her expression didn't crack. She answered, cool as steel, "By remembering that I'm not here to entertain Jimmy, I'm here to serve." That line hit harder than any joke Kimmel had planned. The room tightened. Even the studio techs held their breath. Jimmy tried to pivot. "Okay, but surely you can admit there are moments like those, 3 a.m. Tweets that make your job more colorful." Another smattering of laughter, but it wasn't as strong. Something had shifted. The punchlines were losing their punch. Karoline looked straight at him. No blinking, no fluster, just clarity. "My job isn't to comment on color. It's to tell the truth about what this administration is doing for real Americans. The ones you rarely mention between jokes." That did it. The right side of the audience, where the applause had begun earlier, rose again louder now. Cheers burst through the room. Someone shouted, "That's right," and others echoed, "It wasn't staged. It wasn't artificial. It was real." And it made Jimmy visibly uncomfortable. He lifted his hands as if to calm a crowd he hadn't expected to ignite this way. Okay, he said. "Let's keep it civil." But Karoline didn't need to say anything more. The moment had already shifted. The room wasn't his anymore. It was shared, maybe even tipping. Because in just under 3 minutes, Karoline Leavitt had done something few thought possible on late-night TV. She answered with conviction, not evasion. She brought substance to a stage built for satire, and she didn't flinch once. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen again, his smile thinner now. His eyes darted to his crew. They were off rhythm. The segment wasn't going according to script. Karoline sat still, grounded, unbothered. It was clear she wasn't there for approval. She was there for the millions of Americans who never got invited to this kind of room. The silence that followed was thicker than any laugh line could cut through. Jimmy tried one last time to lighten the mood. You know, Karoline, if you ever get tired of politics, you might have a future in stand-up. You've got timing. She tilted her head. And then came the line that snapped the air again. I don't do stand-up, Jimmy. I stand firm. Boom. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a declaration. And once again, the crowd responded, this time louder, clearer, more unified. The clapping overpowered everything else. The camera caught Jimmy's jaw tighten. His eyes betrayed what his grin tried to hide. He'd lost round one. Karoline didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply looked ahead, poised for whatever came next. And everyone watching, whether in the studio or at home, knew this wasn't just another guest segment. This was something different. This was a battle of worlds, one that had just begun. Jimmy Kimmel wasn't smiling, now he was smirking. And there's a difference. Smiling invites. Smirking provokes. As Karoline Leavitt held her ground after two tough exchanges, he shifted tactics. His voice dropped a notch, casual but loaded with intent. Well, Karoline, he said, since you're all about standing firm tonight, we thought we'd revisit how you stood a few years ago. The lights dimmed slightly. The studio screens flickered to life behind him. The audience turned. Without warning, a grainy clip rolled across the screen. It was Karoline, noticeably younger. 18 years old, standing behind a college podium, her expression tense, uncertain, searching for the right words. She wore a simple sweater, hair tucked back, voice quieter, less formed. And then came the line. Sometimes I don't even know if I believe in this country anymore. The clip paused right there, frozen on her face. The audience gasped. Not the fake kind, not scripted. Real, involuntary sound. A few people laughed nervously. Others murmured. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, hands folded like a poker player. Revealing an ace, he chuckled and delivered the line he knew would land, ladies and gentlemen, your White House press secretary. The audience erupted. On the surface, it was triumph for the host. He'd just aired a moment of youthful doubt and framed it as hypocrisy. Late night gold. But in that moment, the camera panned to Karoline. And what it caught wasn't panic. It wasn't regret. It was something far more dangerous to Jimmy's plan. It was stillness. She didn't blink. She didn't glance at the screen. Her posture never changed. If the clip rattled her, it didn't show. She sat there like a woman who'd already seen the ambush coming. Kimmel grinned wider, mistaking her silence for weakness. I mean, Karoline, he pressed. Are you saying that was just what youthful confusion, cold feet about the flag? A few chuckles sprinkled in, but even the studio crowd was watching more than laughing now. The mood had shifted again. This didn't feel like comedy anymore. It felt tight. Karoline finally moved. She leaned forward, just slightly. Her hands remained folded. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before, but sharper and infinitely more deliberate. I was 18, she said, and I was being honest. The room quieted. I'd just come from a small town where everyone believed in this country. Then I got to college, and all I heard was how America was broken, evil, or beyond redemption. And for a moment, I believed them. No laughter now, just eyes. All on her. But then I realized doubt isn't weakness. It's the first step toward owning your convictions. I didn't stay silent. I spoke out. I asked questions. I wrestled with what I believed. Her tone lifted just slightly. And I came through that fire with something stronger than blind patriotism. I found tested belief. I found purpose. Pause. And tonight you just reminded millions of Americans watching that questioning your country doesn't disqualify you. It qualifies you. Boom. The crowd exploded, not in laughter, but in applause. Real rising undeniable. It wasn't just the pro-Karoline half this time. Even some who came for entertainment now sat stunned, maybe even impressed. Kimmel raised his hand, trying to regain control. Sure, he said, his tone losing its edge. But you have to admit that quote's a tough look for someone who now represents the White House. Karoline didn't let up. Her words came faster, firmer. What's tough, Jimmy, is pretending doubt never happens. What's cowardly is laughing at someone who overcame it. And what's worse, saying something honest at 18, or pretending jokes are journalism at 55, that one hit hard. The crowd murmured again and the applause rolled forward. It wasn't just support, it was recognition. Because many in the audience, especially older viewers, knew that conviction forged through struggle always beats scripted certainty. Jimmy's smile faded, just a hair. He looked to the side of the stage as if silently signaling his crew. He was losing the tempo. Karoline, however, had found hers. You see, she continued, we don't need perfect patriots. We need honest ones. We need people who admit they wrestled with America and chose to fight for her anyway. Because belief that's never been tested isn't belief. It's performance. That last word hung in the air. Performance. A word that mirrored the very stage she sat on. And everyone felt it. Kimmel tried to pull it back, softening his voice. All right, he said. Let's all take a breath here. We're not in Congress. This is a comedy show. Karoline turned to him for the first time since the clip aired. Is it? She asked calmly. Because I thought you just tried to conduct an investigation using a college video. Sounds more like a hearing than a joke. Oof. The audience laughed, but not at her. This time they were laughing at him. For the first time in the segment, Kimmel felt the ground shifting beneath him. He reached for a sip of water, then cleared his throat. Well, at least you didn't say it on Twitter, he joked. But the punch didn't land. It bounced off the reality that his move backfired. Karoline leaned back, composed, powerful, and unmoved. The ambush had failed. Worse, it had backfired. The silence hung thick seconds after Karoline dismantled Jimmy Kimmel's ambush with nothing more than calm truth and tested conviction. The clip meant to embarrass her had instead revealed something powerful. The crowd felt it. The cameras caught it. Kimmel, still seated, tried to keep the tone light. But the room had shifted. It wasn't laughter now. It was attention. Karoline didn't lean back. She didn't smirk. She didn't ride the moment. She stood, no warning, no dramatic cue. Just a simple, quiet decision. She stood up, not facing Jimmy, but turning toward the audience. And in that small, precise motion, the power dynamic of the entire room changed. No music, no lights flashing. Just her voice, steady, sincere, cutting through the fog. Yes, she said, scanning the studio, I once doubted America. She let it sit, no rush, no spin. I doubted because I was young, because I was told every day that this country had nothing left to believe in. And for a while I listened. Her eyes didn't search for approval, she wasn't reciting. She was confessing like someone finally allowed to speak without being mocked. But that doubt didn't destroy me. It woke me up. It made me ask deeper questions. It made me step forward when so many people told me to sit down and stay quiet. She pointed deliberately at the paused image on the screen behind her, her 18-year-old self vulnerable, searching. That girl up there, she wasn't lost. She was learning. The audience leaned in. Some already stood. Others were silent but visibly moved. And now, at 27, I stand here, not perfect, not polished, but forged. And I've chosen fully and freely to defend this country with everything I've got. Because I've seen what's at stake when we stop believing. That was the moment. Not a punchline, not a policy pitch, just clarity and courage. And the crowd responded. It started with one man near the center row, maybe in his 70s, gray flannel shirt, eyes glassy, who slowly stood and began to clap. Then another, then two women near the side aisle, then more. The studio built for applause on cue now erupted organically. Real, thunderous, unapologetic applause. A standing ovation mid-show for something that wasn't funny, but deeply, unmistakably true. Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She let them have the moment, not for her, but for themselves. Because what they were applauding wasn't just her. It was themselves, their struggles, their doubts, their long memories of a country worth fighting for. And the reminder that someone in Washington hadn't forgotten them. Kimmel stayed seated, lips drawn tight. He tapped his pen. He looked at the monitor. He tried to insert a line, but even he knew this wasn't his segment anymore. Finally, he leaned forward, almost whispering into his mic. Okay, folks, let's remember. We're still a comedy show here. It fell flat. Not a chuckle. Not even from his most loyal side. Karoline turned back, finally meeting Jimmy's gaze. Exactly, Jimmy. And that's the problem. Gasps from the audience. She wasn't done. This country is hurting. People are working 2 jobs and still falling behind. Veterans are ignored. Faith is mocked. Truth is edited for punchlines. She stepped slightly closer to the center, not turning, just anchoring. I didn't come here for applause. I came here because Americans deserve to be spoken to, not laughed at. The words hit harder than any joke of the night. So when you showed that clip, hoping I'd stumble or shrink, I didn't. Because I already walked through that fire. And instead of burning, I rebuilt. The ovation rose again, louder, fuller. Now even younger viewers in the back rows stood. Some recorded on their phones, capturing what they instinctively knew would go viral by morning. Karoline lowered her voice, not dramatically, but deliberately. To every American watching who's ever been told they're not enough, that their doubts disqualify them or their values make them outdated, I'm here to say you're not alone, and you're not done. Kimmel tried to speak again, leaning in with forced casualness. Karoline, this isn't a campaign stop. She cut him off calmly, firmly. No, Jimmy, it's not. It's a truth stop, and you just accidentally made room for it. The room exploded again, this time not just in applause, but in emotion. People weren't just clapping, they were cheering. And something rare happened, a few in the studio audience cried. Because Karoline hadn't just won a segment. She'd seized a moment that every American who'd ever felt mocked, dismissed, or silenced could point to and say that. That's what we needed. Then, as if sensing the perfect arc of the moment, Karoline did something no one expected. She took one step back toward her chair, paused, and then turned not toward Jimmy, but toward the audience once more. I'll sit back down now. But just know America doesn't need more entertainers. It needs more truth-tellers. And with that she sat, calm, composed, and completely in control. Kimmel, rattled but attempting recovery, offered a line. Well, that certainly wasn't in the script. Karoline smiled softly. No, Jimmy, but real life rarely is. The crowd laughed, not at her but with her. The tide had turned. Completely. For the first time in years, a late-night show built to dismantle faith, flag, and family had just become a platform, however briefly, for something deeper. And no one in that room would forget it. Jimmy Kimmel knew he was losing control of the room. The crowd had shifted, the tone had changed. And Karoline Leavitt, now seated again, but no less commanding, had just turned his own stage into a space of conviction. The humor was gone, and he needed it back. Badly. So he tried to pivot. His voice sharpened as he leaned into the next question, louder, faster, more like a jab than a joke. Karoline, who exactly are you defending? A president who's driven prices up, caused chaos, and made the world laugh at us. It was no longer veiled satire. It was a direct hit, framed as a challenge, meant to corner her with statistics, headlines, and ridicule. A classic late-night maneuver, reframe the guest as a defender of dysfunction, cast her as a mouthpiece, not a person. But Karoline didn't blink. She didn't inhale sharply, didn't break eye contact. Instead, she spoke immediately, no pause, no hesitation. Her voice landed with more force than volume. I'm defending the people you forget exist. The audience froze. You could almost hear a heartbeat. The factory worker clocking out at midnight with a sore back and no camera on him. The single mom balancing 2 kids and a grocery bill. The veteran sitting alone wondering if anyone remembers his name. That's who I show up for. Not for your headlines. Not for your punchlines. Then she did something the camera crew didn't expect. She turned and pointed straight into the lens. You at home, yes, you. You're not watching someone who claims to have all the answers. You're watching someone who still believes you deserve to be spoken to with respect. The studio was dead quiet. Not because the audience was unsure, but because they were stunned. Older viewers especially understood exactly what was happening. Karoline had taken a confrontation and flipped it into communion. It wasn't about her anymore, it was about them. I don't need this show to validate my truth, she added, her voice unwavering. Because truth doesn't come from applause meters or comedy writers. It comes from living through the pain and still showing up. Jimmy tried to retort, but for the first time he didn't know how. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The cameras caught his hand moving toward his cue cards, then away. He was sweating now, not heavily, but enough for the HD lens to pick up the glint on his forehead. Karoline stayed calm, sitting tall. She wasn't angry, she wasn't smug. She was centered. Every word she spoke landed with precision, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't need to. Kimmel leaned forward again, his tone now touched with frustration. But how do you defend someone whose policies have made things harder for working Americans? Karoline didn't dodge. She leaned right back. You mean the policies that brought 2.3 million manufacturing jobs back last year? You mean the lowest unemployment rate, 3.5%, in 50 years? You mean energy independence, veteran care reform, and standing up to China after decades of politicians just talking about it? She let that hang in the air like a blade that didn't need to swing. It just needed to be seen. The truth is, this country didn't become chaotic because of one man. It became chaotic because people in rooms like this thought laughter was a substitute for leadership. Boom. The audience gasped, then clapped. Not everyone, but enough to fill the studio with the kind of sound that doesn't fade quickly. Kimmel laughed, awkward, deflective. That's a strong opinion. Karoline answered, soft and razor sharp. No, Jimmy, that's a lived reality. You sit behind a desk and joke about families struggling with gas prices. I sit in briefings where we talk about getting food to rural counties. You're paid to provoke. I'm called to protect. The studio lights suddenly felt hotter. The tension wasn't artificial anymore. It was real, raw, and public. Kimmel attempted one more line, hoping to pull it back. So what comedy is the enemy now? Karoline looked at him, directly, kindly, but not gently. Comedy isn't the enemy. Distraction is. The enemy's pretending everything's a joke, while millions of people suffer quietly. And then she said something that would be quoted for days, maybe weeks after the show aired. This country doesn't need more comedians. It needs more courage. The room erupted, loud, unified, uncontrollable. People stood. Some clapped. Some cheered. Some simply stared because they knew they had witnessed something rare on live television. A woman who didn't flinch under fire, who didn't twist words, and who refused to apologize for her belief in America. For the older viewers, watching from home, retirees, veterans, working class families, the moment resonated. Not because she was young or articulate, but because she was honest. She had been hit with ridicule, accusation, and live footage of her past, and she turned it all into purpose. She didn't just defend the administration. She defended the American people. Kimmel, finally recognizing he was outmatched, sat back and forced a smile. You've certainly made your case, Karoline. She nodded once. Not a case, Jimmy. A commitment. The screen behind them dimmed. The commercial countdown clock silently lit up. Studio producers scrambled behind the scenes, trying to adjust to the emotional wave they hadn't expected. But the audience wasn't waiting for the next segment. They were still standing, still processing. And Karoline, she didn't take a bow, she didn't raise her hand. She simply sat, dignified, calm, complete. Because the fight wasn't for show, it was for something much bigger. The air inside the studio wasn't just tense, it was electric. Karoline Leavitt had gone toe-to-toe with Jimmy Kimmel for over 15 minutes, and in that time she dismantled ridicule, responded with reason, and redefined what courage looked like on national television. But now, as applause settled into a powerful stillness, everyone in the room felt that something final was coming. Karoline didn't look exhausted. She didn't look angry. She looked resolved. Then, without warning, she reached up calmly, purposefully, and began to remove her microphone. The studio fell completely silent. No dramatic score, no producer's cue, just the subtle, unmistakable click as she detached the mic from her blazer lapel. She didn't fumble, didn't hesitate. She placed it gently on the desk between them. The act itself was quiet, but it echoed through the room like a bell toll. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't point fingers. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked directly at Kimmel. Her voice was even composed, but carried the weight of every American watching who had ever felt dismissed by media and mocked for their beliefs. When a stage no longer respects the truth, she said a person of honor doesn't stay on it. That was it. Simple, unshakable. The audience reacted instantly, not with confusion, but with clarity. First came the clapping, then the cheers, and then something far more powerful, a rising chant from the back of the room. At first it was soft, then it grew. Karoline, Karoline. It wasn't orchestrated. It wasn't scripted. It was earned. Karoline turned this time, not toward the cameras, not toward Kimmel, but toward the audience. She gave a slight respectful nod as if thanking them, not for the noise, but for hearing her heart. And then she walked. Her stride was steady, posture upright. No grandstanding, no glance backward. She didn't storm off in protest. She exited in conviction, like someone who understood that making a statement sometimes means leaving the room entirely. The camera followed her silhouette as she disappeared into the shadows beyond the studio lights. It caught the final moment before she crossed the threshold, her red blazer glowing like a flame in the darkness. And yet the applause didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder. In homes across America, especially among older viewers, that walk-off wasn't seen as dramatic, it was seen as dignified. Because it wasn't about showmanship, it was about drawing a line. And for many, watching it reminded them of a time when integrity meant knowing when to stop talking and simply stand for something even in silence. Back in the studio, Jimmy Kimmel sat frozen. His face was pale. His fingers tapped the edge of the desk, but his eyes stared toward the curtain Karoline had just passed through. The chant was still going, Karoline, Karoline. He attempted a smile, the kind that usually diffused tension. But this time it didn't land. He reached for a joke, any joke, but his mouth stayed closed. He looked to the audience, searching for a laugh that wasn't there. Finally, he muttered into the mic, "Well, that was something." And that was all he had. Because the show had slipped out of his hands and everyone knew it. The cameras cut to wide-angle catching stunned faces, phones held high, even a few teary-eyed viewers in the crowd. This wasn't a standard interview. This wasn't even just a viral moment. It was a cultural marker. The music that played into commercial break was faint, but it couldn't drown out the echo of Karoline's final act, walking away from the microphone not to avoid questions, but to rise above the noise. Social media would explode within minutes. Clips of her removing the mic and walking off would be played in slow motion, set to everything from classical anthems to country ballads. Twitter would be flooded with hashtags like #CarolineWalks, #Honor, over headlines, and #Truth doesn't need a stage. YouTube thumbnails would freeze frame that final image, her back, to the lights, the crowd still roaring. But for those watching it live, especially older Americans who'd long grown tired of sarcasm standing in for substance, it wasn't about the internet. It was about something deeper. Karoline had done what so few on television ever dare to do. She stopped performing. And in doing so, she reminded a divided nation what quiet strength looks like. She didn't fight to stay relevant. She chose to walk out when the conversation no longer honored truth. That walk wasn't a retreat, it was a declaration. And long after the lights dimmed, and the credits rolled, that image, Karoline Leavitt standing tall, walking alone, the crowd chanting behind her, would remain etched in the minds of millions. Karoline Leavitt's quiet walk off stage didn't end the conversation, it detonated one. By the time the studio lights dimmed and the credits rolled, America wasn't switching channels. They were switching tabs. Within minutes, the digital world exploded into a frenzy that neither Jimmy Kimmel nor any network executive could have anticipated. The moment Karoline gently removed her microphone, delivered her final words, and walked away without dramatics, she didn't just exit a stage, she entered history. Twitter went first. The hashtag Karoline's Truth trended within 5 minutes of her departure. A close second, stage exit. It wasn't just conservatives fueling the fire, moderate, independent, and even some traditionally liberal users weighed in. One viral tweet read, "She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam the desk. She just stood up and walked out with dignity. That's not politics, that's leadership." Within the hour, tens of thousands of tweets followed. Veterans groups, mothers networks, retired teachers, firefighters, people who hadn't posted political content in years now had something to say, and what they said was simple. This felt different. On TikTok, the moment became cinematic. Dozens of users posted slow-motion edits of Karoline removing her mic and turning away. One added a background score of orchestral drums and strings titling it, "She walked off, but she didn't walk alone." Another layered her clip with Johnny Cash's "God's Gonna Cut You Down," capturing the symbolic sense of judgment her silence had rendered on a system too used to controlling the conversation. By sunrise, the top 10 TikTok videos under her name had amassed over 22 million views collectively. Not a single one featured her yelling. Not one was edited for rage. They all showcased the same thing, unshakable calm. YouTube too went wild. The official upload of the Kimmel-Leavitt interview hit 5 million views within 24 hours, making it the most watched segment on his channel in over a year. But the comment section didn't read like the usual debate pit. This was supposed to humiliate her. It crowned her instead. "I'm 72. Haven't seen that kind of poise since Margaret Thatcher on the world stage." She didn't flinch. I watched it 3 times. She never flinched. YouTubers with large followings, both political and apolitical, rushed to create reaction content. One, a retired Marine with 800,000 subscribers, simply titled his video, "We Just Saw a Real Leader." Fox News ran the headline first. Karoline's own social media remained quiet. For 12 hours, she said nothing. No tweet, no press release, no follow-up video. And that silence only intensified the impact. It felt strategic, but more than that, it felt authentic. When she finally did post, it was one sentence. The microphone was never the message. That tweet garnered over 1 million likes in the first 8 hours and over 300,000 retweets. Underneath, thousands of comments poured in from across the spectrum. "I'm not Republican, but that was presidential. You didn't walk off, you walked us forward. I've voted Democrat for 40 years. Today I followed you." Print media began coverage by dawn. The Wall Street Journal called it a new standard for composure in confrontation. Politico ran a special profile titled, "The Poise That Broke the Format, How Leavitt Redefined the Guest Chair." What Karoline had done wasn't just rare, it was unreplicable. She didn't go viral for attacking. She went viral for refusing to play along. She didn't perform. She held still. She didn't shout over anyone. She let the silence do the speaking. And in a world of endless noise, scrolling, shouting, scripting, her choice to rise, walk away, and let truth stand alone hit harder than any monologue, any segment, any clapback ever could. College professors cited the moment in media courses. Ethics professors used it as a case study in moral presence. Podcasts ranging from political to religious quoted her words about doubt, service, and dignity. But more than anything, ordinary Americans remembered. A veteran in Texas posted, "I fought overseas so Americans could speak freely. What Karoline did last night reminded me why that freedom matters." A widow in Ohio wrote, She reminded me of how leaders used to sound. A retired school teacher in Iowa commented, "She didn't win because of policy. She won because she respected us." Karoline Leavitt didn't shout, argue, or break down. She simply stood up, spoke clearly, removed her mic, and walked away. And in doing so, she didn't just leave a stage, she lit one on fire. The aftershock is still rolling, not just online, but in the hearts of Americans who'd nearly given up on dignity in public discourse. She didn't restore their faith overnight, but she gave it a spark, and sometimes that's all a nation needs. In a world where shouting often replaces listening and entertainment overshadows substance, Karoline Leavitt's Walk Off reminds us of an enduring truth. Sometimes the most powerful statement is made in silence. Her quiet strength, choosing dignity over drama, echoes a lesson many older Americans know well, that character is proven not when you have the last word, but when you know when to walk away. Karoline didn't win by being loud. She won by being steady. She didn't insult. She didn't react. She stood her ground, spoke her truth, and exited with grace. That moment, simple as it was, has inspired a generation that still believes in composure, decency, and earned respect. As we face a culture of constant noise and division, her example reminds us that conviction and calm are not opposites. They are companions. Let us carry that mindset into our own conversations, our families, and even our nation's future. What did this moment mean to you? Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories where truth, courage, and common sense still matter. Because sometimes the quietest voice leaves the loudest echo.